I'm the Head of SEO at Absolute Digital Media. My talk today is going to be on a technical solution to content duplication. The reason I've chosen this talk is because my background is in content creation. I started in SEO and content 5.5 years ago working at Absolute. And one of my biggest pet peeves is new clients coming on board and there just being a ridiculous amount of content duplication causing issues after issues, all being indexed. And actually it leads to my face pretty much being like this 90% of the time. Not happy. Don't tell my boss that actually I was doing that at him when the photo was taken. So duplicate content refers to content that is the same or very similar across the same domain, but also across multiple domains, which is something a lot of people tend to forget. When we're looking at same domain duplicate content, this can include a number of different things, such as URL variations. So e-commerce websites in particular are a nightmare for this. So there's a number of different ways that URL variations can be formed, and typically they're the ones that end up being indexed all over the web and just causing numerous SEO issues. Then we've got HTTP and HTTPS. And this happens normally when, that annoying situation where the redirect doesn't actually work or isn't put in place at all. And boilerplate content. So again, working back in content over the years, having the little snippet of text at the end of every page, like to find out more, get in touch with our experts today. Everyone does it, I used to do it as well. But that can cause a huge number of issues when it comes to content duplication. And then when we're looking at cross-domain duplicate content, this can include things like scraped content. Now, scraping isn't necessarily a bad thing depending on the reason why you're scraping, but when it comes to scraped content, that's normally people taking, so for example, big chunks of text, perhaps product descriptions off of the trade websites, and sticking them all across your product descriptions as well. Website migrations. So we all know that SEOs love working with developers so much when it comes to website migrations. If anything, it's possibly one of the biggest problems when it comes to anything with SEO. Website migrations can cause a number of issues with duplicate content. For example, if the website isn't redirected properly, or if the actual staging site version, which I've seen on numerous occasions, is being indexed as well as the live moved site as well. And competitors. So we all love spying on our competitors. We all like looking at what they're doing, looking at their visibility, looking at the content and how they're performing. But I've seen numerous occasions where some competitors are actually looking a little bit too closely and they end up taking your copy, putting it on their website, hoping it's going to do a lot better. And I've seen it with my clients coming on board as well where they think that's a really good technique. It's not. So duplicate content won't necessarily lead you into a penalty, but it can significantly hurt your search rankings, really badly. Search engines won't always know which page to rank. So when there's 2 pages of content or more than that are very, very similar, they don't know which one to do. They don't know how to split authority. For the same reason, if the pages are too similar and you've got links going to both of them, which one is the most important one? And they won't know which version of the page to show for a relevant search term. So you could be trying to rank for the biggest keyword in your industry, but if you've got numerous pages that are targeting that same keyword, how's Google going to know which one's the most relevant, even when it comes to search intent? But if content duplication is so bad, then why does it happen? There are estimates that actually 29% of the internet is duplicate content. So with that much, why? Why does it happen? Most of it's actually a complete accident. And URL variations, which I mentioned earlier, my biggest pet peeve in the world, are one of the common causes of content duplication. So URL variations include things like click tracking and analytics codes, where you're potentially putting different types of click tracking scripts on each of the pages, and it's causing that to duplicate. Same with session IDs. So every time a new user visits that website URL, it's causing a brand new page to be automatically generated, therefore duplicate content. And printer-friendly URLs. So I don't see this as much as what I used to a few years ago, but it can still happen. 2 of the same pages, but one's actually a bit more printer-friendly. But there are also lots of other types of common content duplication causes, which I mentioned earlier. The But how do you actually fix your content duplication issues? So I put out a poll on Twitter and on LinkedIn to find out exactly what the SEO world generally do. Most people think canonicalization. On Twitter, out of almost 1,000 votes, 57.5% of people chose canonicalization. Let me put this to you guys as well. What would you typically do? Is it canonicalization? Raise your hand if you would normally do canonicalization for any kind of duplicate content issues. Yeah, me too. It's generally the most common way to fix it. But there are other ways to fix it as well. So, no indexing. You could rewrite everything. There's another couple of options too. And this is the same thing on LinkedIn as well, so most people here also choosing canonicalization. So Nat had a really great point when it came to what other options there are. So why not start with why? Why is that duplication occurring? And then working out what the best solution is from there, rather than just a blanket, let's canonicalize it. There's a number of different reasons why that canonicalization could be needed, but perhaps that particular content duplication issue is caused by things such as the platform. It could be human error. Someone's accidentally published the same page twice, or 3 times, or 4 times. It can happen. Or maybe it's pagination. So finding that root cause first, and then finding that best solution. So making sure that you're actually investigating the why before you're looking at the fix can really help to make sure you're choosing the best solution, not just for your site, but just generally for your SEO performance overall. So let's look a little bit more at when you should be using canonicalization. Some questions to consider. Are the pages that you're looking at when it comes to content duplication exact duplicates? Is one of the pages that generating more traffic or more visibility than the other one? Does the page offer any additional value that may not actually translate to SEO value? So for example, it's a page that you don't necessarily want ranking, but users find very, very, very useful when they're visiting your website. Perhaps it's something to eat, it could be an About Us page, it could be something that actually people tend to use, but Google's not really that interested in it. If you've answered yes, yes, and yes, then canonicalization could be your best bet here. But let's look at a few of the other options as well that were in the poll. So for example, no indexing, stopping the bots from actually indexing the page whatsoever. Questions to consider. Are your crawl stats suggesting that Google is wasting a lot of valuable time and a lot of crawl budget crawling all of these pages? So this is something that you really need to consider if you've got a huge website. So I'm talking e-commerce, thousands and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, almost millions of URLs. Imagine it's Amazon, for example. Are your crawl stats showing that Google bots are spending so much time crawling all of these other pages that actually you don't even need them indexed? Do you need these pages showing in Google search results? And does the page offer valuable information to users? So again, looking at that value of user value versus SEO value. Now, Lyndon had a really great answer again to the poll, looking at that user versus SEO value. She said, in some cases, the content has user value, but Google simply sees it as rubbish. Just about the only time that they suggest no index, and these should be few and far between, is when there is a page that has great user value, but not necessarily SEO value. So if you answered yes, no, and yes, then you may want to no index if canonicalization isn't an option. So there are times where canonicalization may not be possible, for example, if you don't have dev resource to be able to help you implement these different things, or perhaps your actual system that you're using does not allow you to actually implement these canonicals. It does happen, I have seen it. Now let's look at redirects. Some questions to consider about whether or not you should redirect it in the case of duplicate content. Does the page need to exist at all? If the answer is no, then you might want to consider redirecting it. Now I'm talking definitely 301s, not 302s, because you want to make sure that Google's not ignoring that whatsoever. But maybe we need to look at rewriting the content instead. And I'm not talking about jumping on Fiverr and going, hey, $5, can you rewrite all my content for me? Because again, clients have done this in the past. So when it comes to rewriting that content itself, you may want to consider perhaps targeting the page with a new search intent. So when it comes to search intent, we know that there's a number of different things that you can consider, such as, is it informational, is it transactional, is it branded? Maybe we need some branded content on there. If you've got pages that are very similar to each other, then maybe we need to start looking at whether or not you can refocus that content piece. It could be two different transactional pages that we can go, maybe we can make this a branded page instead, and look at rewriting it that way, rather than just completely disregarding it. And it is a really important consideration, as long as you've got the resource behind you. And talking about resource, do you actually have the resource to rewrite? So I deal with a number of different businesses, a number of different clients of all sizes, with all SEO budgets. Talking from kind of £300 a month clients up to like £100 a month clients. Not everyone will have the resource to be able to rewrite all of that content, whether that's internally, in-house, whether that's looking at an agency being able to do that for them, maybe that's a freelancer they want to outsource it all to. People don't always have that budget behind them to be able to go through thousands of URLs, particularly again on e-commerce websites, product descriptions for example. So we need to consider that when it comes to recommendations to any clients when we're looking at that duplicate content situation. If you've answered yes to both, then rewrites may be a better option. So you can relook at different pages when it comes to targeting search intent. And you've got the resource to actually go ahead and rewrite it, whether that's in-house, externally, however you want to do it. So maybe you need to look at rewriting. Or maybe you just need to live with it. So Andy Beard had a really great thing on this, looking at publishing articles on Medium, for example, and using their cross-domain canonicalization. So imagine getting 100 links to the Medium post, and Google decides to ignore the canonical. Maybe you need to live with it. Or maybe you don't have the resource, you don't have the SEO budget, you don't have the web development resource in-house or externally either. You can't implement canonicalizations, you can't implement redirects, you can't rewrite all of the content across the whole website because it's just too much budget. Maybe you just need to live with it and see kind of what Google does and focus your resource and your content efforts. Maybe not necessarily on the content duplication, depending on how much of an impact that is having on your visibility, and targeting that somewhere else where actually you can get much more value and much more ROI from. If it makes content sense and it makes cost sense, so for example it doesn't cost 10 times more than the implementation cost in the first place, then maybe just live with it and go ahead and rewrite or redirect. But if you can implement a resolution, then that is often the better choice for long-term SEO success. Ideally, from an SEO best practice and in an ideal world, if you've got the resource available and you do really want to make sure that your whole website is doing everything from Google's perspective, try and get rid of the duplicate content. So let me just recap all of the different reasons and where you might need to use all of these different solutions. So redirects, looking at HTTP versus HTTPS domains, making sure you've got your 301 redirect in place there and that you've not got two versions of the website up. Pages that are not valuable, are outdated and irrelevant. So this is looking more at a content pruning approach. So going through all of the pages on your website, making sure that you have a really clear understanding of the performance of each of those individual pages, and also whether or not they're going to be driving the right amount of traffic, the right quality of traffic, so you're not driving completely irrelevant, kind of great 1,000 users a month, but they're not actually doing anything, they're bouncing straight away. So there you might actually need to redirect that. And non-www and www versions. So again, people not implementing that redirect and you're having two different versions of the website live. Canonicalization, so often an SEO favourite looking at the polls. You may want to use canonicalization when you've got exact duplicate pages that offer user value, so they do need to stay there. And pages that cannot be rewritten, so again, maybe from a resource perspective. But it's important to remember with canonicalization, and this is something that a lot of people tend to forget, it's not a directive. It's not a rule that Google has to follow. They can completely ignore that canonical tag. So making sure that you're using it in the right places, and bearing that in mind, if you perhaps can't do a redirect, for example, that's maybe when you need to use canonical. You may also want to use canonical tags if one page generates more traffic or visibility than another, and it is duplicate content. And again, if you can't redirect it because of technical restrictions. Then looking at content rewrites. So you might want to use content rewrite if you can target different key terms or search intent within that copy. So making sure that you're moving all of the different types of search intent and categorising that in the best way on your website. And you have the resource to implement. Always the biggest kind of hold up for a lot of companies is that resource element. And maybe you would want to no index something. So if you absolutely need to keep the page, but it holds no SEO value, so users are able to access the website, they love this page, you know that it gets a lot of hits, but actually from an SEO perspective, it's not that useful, you may want to no index it. And if bots are wasting valuable crawl budget and 301 redirects are really not an option, this is when you might need to no index your pages. But there are also some other considerations for content duplication. You may want to look at blocking the crawling of parameterized duplicate content with the URL parameter tool. So again, looking at these e-commerce websites, perhaps looking at the sort, the order functions, all of these different areas that maybe your faceted navigation is causing all of these different parameter URLs, you can actually block the crawling of that directly in the URL parameter tool from Google. Some people do like to also do this in the robots.txt file. It's not always the best way because you do want to make sure that Google can access these pages as well, but making sure that we're telling Google what we need them to see, URL parameter tool is a great one. Keeping your internal linking consistent. This is something I've seen actually very recently on an open cart platform, where if you end up putting internal links that perhaps some of them have the trailing slash, some of them don't, some of them have /index.html, you end up actually creating duplicate pages completely by accident, just from people not copy-pasting the internal linking or not doing it directly on the website URLs, maybe from an old keyword mapping file, for example. Keeping that internal linking consistent can really help to make sure that you're not causing all of these other pages that maybe you don't even know about and you don't even know exist. So this is coming back to that human error situation, but also the platform. Being able to really make sure you're keeping that consistent within all of the copy will help to remove any kind of content duplication problems. So for country-specific content, so I won't go into this too much because international SEO is a whole other subject, but Google advises the use of country code top-level domains and hreflang. So the reason for this is apparently Google can understand the domain's actual language a lot easier when using CCTLDs. But when it comes to duplicate content, making sure that those hreflang tags are in place can make sure that Google is crawling the page correctly and indexing it on the correct search engine language. And if you're looking at really significant resource issues and you've got loads and loads of duplicate content, potentially product pages, for example, on a massive e-commerce website, and you can't get someone to manually go through all these pages and rewrite them, because it does take a lot of time, a lot of research to be doing that. And maybe you've been copy-pasting it from the trade website or competitor's website, because again, it does happen, we've seen it. You may want to look at using the OpenAI and GPT-3 to actually automate that content and that content spinning process. It's not ideal, and you normally would like to have someone to cast their eye over that because it's machine learning. We've seen it from Google's recent update with the page titles. They're not always great when it's calling Joe Biden Vice President of the United States when he's actually the President now. But that could be an option for you when it comes to that resource issue, just automating that process. Thank you. So, as I said, I'm Sophie Brannon. I'm the Head of SEO at Absolute Digital. It's been a pleasure speaking with you guys today. I've got lots of resources at the end of my slides, just looking at all of the different types of content duplication issues, an amazing flowchart from Billy Gina as well, from the SEO Works. Fantastic work with Canonicalization there. So, thank you for having me.